The coffee had been stone cold for 40 minutes, but it wasn't the temperature that made my hand tremble. It was the way Mr. Sterling watched me wait. I was supposed to be delivering a latte to his executive assistant, Elodie, who was out sick, but somehow I ended up leaning against the sleek glass wall of his office, the untouched mug getting heavier in my hand. He hadn't said anything meaningful since confirming I was Lila from marketing. Just silence, the hum of the city 20 floors below, and the terrifying slow drag of his gaze over my face. My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, panicked drum in the luxurious quiet. I knew I should leave, but his presence was a paralyzing, beautiful force. My existence at Sterling & Associates was defined by competent quiet. I was Lila, a junior analyst in the digital marketing department, a department so vast and constantly buzzing with 20-somethings scrolling through analytics that my singular presence barely registered. I was good at my job, meticulous with spreadsheets, timely with reports, and always invisible. That's how I liked it. Mostly. Visibility meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant disappointment. It was safer to be the dependable shadow. My routine was a comforting loop of predictability. Up at 6, 2 slices of whole wheat toast, the same playlist during the commute on the C train, and then 8 hours immersed in the sterile glow of my dual monitors. In the evenings, I usually went home to my small, sun-starved apartment in Astoria, ordered Thai takeout, and read until my eyes burned. It wasn't an unhappy life. It was a measured one. I had trained myself to keep my emotional expectations low, treating any moment of real connection as a pleasant but unsustainable anomaly. This particular Tuesday was meant to be exactly the same. I was focused on optimizing the Q3 ad spend when Elodie, Mr. Sterling's impossibly elegant executive assistant, a woman who wore the kind of silk blouses I couldn't afford and smelled faintly of gardenias, sent an urgent email. She was suffering from a migraine and needed me to cover a few essential tasks she couldn't delegate to anyone else in the moment, specifically the preparation of the afternoon presentation and, crucially, the delivery of his daily 2 p.m. latte. The idea of being anywhere near the C-suite gave me immediate performance anxiety. It was a different atmosphere up there, hushed and intimidating, far removed from the loud camaraderie of the 10th floor. Mr. Sterling himself was a myth, a handsome, intimidating ghost who materialized only during quarterly meetings or when the stock dropped. His reputation was clinical efficiency, legendary focus, and an impenetrable reserve. I tried to pawn the coffee delivery off on Kevin from accounts, but Elodie's email had been clear. Lila, you are the only one I trust to get the temperature exactly right. He's very particular. I sighed, pushing away the spreadsheet. It was 1:55 p.m. I brewed the latte myself, carefully measuring the exact amount of foam and the precise temperature. I put it on the company's nicest coaster, reminding myself this was just a chore. A simple, predictable chore. I was Lila from marketing, doing a favor. Nothing more. Nothing that could possibly alter the smooth, safe trajectory of my quiet, unremarkable day. The elevator ride to the 22nd floor was the longest 4 seconds of my afternoon. When the doors opened, the silence was immediate and thick, broken only by the soft, rhythmic clicking of the keyboard coming from the empty desk where Elodie should have been. The area was minimalist, white marble, dark wood, and a single, stunning view of Midtown. Sterling's office door was slightly ajar, which was unusual. I knew from Elodie's obsessive notes that his door was never supposed to be open unless he was expecting a board member. I approached the open door hesitantly, the heavy ceramic mug warming my palms. I tapped lightly on the doorframe, a delicate sound that seemed deafening in the stillness. Mr. Sterling, I have your latte. Elodie asked me to bring it up. The man who rose from the deep leather chair was taller than I remembered from the brief glimpses during company assemblies. His name was Adrian Sterling. He was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored so sharply it looked like it was molded to his formidable frame. He didn't look up immediately, but continued to sign a document, his movements precise and economical. I noticed the dark shadows under his eyes, a fatigue that the powerful lighting of the office couldn't quite erase. He looked less like an invincible corporate titan, and more like a man who hadn't slept properly in weeks. "Leave it on the credenza, please, Lila," he said, without looking up. His voice was low, slightly rough, and carried the weight of unquestioned authority. I walked the 4 steps across the plush carpet, placing the latte exactly where Elodie marked it in her schematic diagram of the office, dead center of the mahogany credenza. I started to turn, my mission accomplished, already planning my quick retreat back to the safety of the 10th floor. But as I reached the door, he finally lifted his head. His eyes, a startling clear hazel, met mine. There was no warmth, no dismissal, just intense, unexpected focus. "Thank you," he said. It sounded genuine, not just a formal corporate pleasantry. "You're welcome, sir," I mumbled, already backing out. "Wait." I froze, my hand hovering over the cold metal of the door handle. I turned back, my heart doing a quick, nervous stutter step. This was where I would receive an instruction, a critique, or a query about the ad spend. He didn't reference work. He just looked past the credenza, at the untouched mug I had placed there. "That's not my coffee." I blinked, confused. "Pardon me, sir," Elodie said. "Elodie drinks a latte. I drink black coffee, double espresso, no milk, no sugar. Elodie knows this." My cheeks flushed instantly, hot with professional failure. I had messed up a basic task, a task Elodie had specifically trusted me with. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling. I must have misread the note. I'll go downstairs immediately and fix it." "No," he said, holding up a hand. "Don't bother." He gestured vaguely at the mug I had made with such care. "Just tell me what you were planning to do with that latte, Lila." I stammered. "It was for Elodie, sir. I assumed it was yours because of the delivery time." He leaned back in his chair, folding his hands over his midsection. He looked entirely too composed, entirely too observant. "It's cold now anyway. But since you're here, and since you know how to make a perfect latte, would you mind terribly waiting a few minutes? I'm expecting a call, and I need someone to answer Elodie's line." It was an absurdity. The CEO of a multinational corporation was asking a junior analyst to be a temporary receptionist because of a mistake I'd made with a latte. But I could only nod, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down. It wasn't a punishment, but an accidental invitation. And I accepted it purely out of duty, completely unaware that the cold coffee I'd mistakenly brought was the perfect metaphor for the cold existence I was about to leave behind. I settled into Elodie's chair, which smelled faintly of leather cleaner and that elusive gardenia scent. The desk felt immense and important, and the red phone on the corner was terrifyingly silent. I pulled out my phone, intending to text my coworker Chloe about the unexpected detour, but felt the immediate need to appear fully focused. Adrian Sterling was operating only a few feet away, separated by a wall of high-gloss wood and glass. He was the definition of unattainable, not just because of his wealth or his position, but because of his sheer gravity. He moved with a subtle, controlled efficiency that implied every action had been calculated 3 steps ahead. He was 38, according to the profile I once read, and had taken his father's struggling real estate empire and turned it into a global investment firm in less than 10 years. He was an object of professional admiration and distant curiosity, but never, ever a romantic possibility. He dated models and actresses, women whose very existence was public and dazzling. I was Lila, the girl who worried about quarterly ad metrics and paid her rent on the 5th. I watched him discreetly through the gap in the office door as he answered a call that was clearly important. He spoke softly, his tone level, but the intensity radiating from him was palpable. He paced slightly, one hand tucked into his trouser pocket, the other holding the phone. He didn't use corporate jargon. He used precise, almost architectural language, constructing deals with words. I noted the way the afternoon sun caught the slight silver in his dark hair near his temples, something I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't the silver of age, but the silver of immense pressure. I registered the faint but deep line etched between his eyebrows. He was utterly alone in that office, surrounded by awards and views, yet looking profoundly isolated. He hung up the phone and ran a large, manicured hand over the back of his neck, a rare moment of visible fatigue. He didn't see me watching him, which made the moment feel doubly intrusive. He walked toward the credenza, not for the cold latte, but for the glass of water next to it. He paused for a beat, looking down at the untouched ceramic mug I had brought, the one filled with milk and vanilla syrup, Elodie's custom order. He finally looked at me, giving me a small, almost imperceptible shake of the head. "It's unsettling how quiet it is up here when Elodie is out," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the low volume. "I can imagine, sir," I replied, trying to sound suitably professional. "Do you enjoy the 10th floor, Lila?" The question was so simple, so mundane that it threw me off balance. "It's busy," I managed. "Lots of activity, good for analytics." He smiled, a brief, tight movement that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good for being invisible, you mean?" The observation hit me with unexpected force. It wasn't a critique, but a statement of fact, delivered by a man who was clearly very good at observing the mechanics of the people around him. He saw my deliberate anonymity. He saw me. The air tightened, stretched thin between his desk and Elodie's. His comment, "Good for being invisible, you mean," was hanging there, a silent acknowledgement of the core truth of my existence at Sterling & Associates. I felt a sudden, sharp sting of exposure. I didn't try to deny it. "I suppose it is, sir," I admitted, my voice a little husky. I fiddled with the edges of a notepad on the desk, wishing I could disappear back to my spreadsheets. He didn't press the point, but his hazel eyes lingered on me for a fraction of a second too long. It was the kind of look that went beyond the professional acknowledgement of an employee. It was the look of someone studying an unexpected data point. "Did I say something wrong, Lila?" he asked, sensing my sudden retreat. "No, Mr. Sterling. It's just an accurate assessment." I forced a small, neutral smile. It takes a certain kind of personality to thrive in the spotlight. I'm just here to make the numbers look good. He moved toward the glass wall, looking out at the city that stretched below us, a dizzying tapestry of concrete and achievement. "You think success requires being loud?" "It requires being seen," I corrected gently, "and most of the time I'd rather not be." He turned, leaning back against the cool glass, his posture relaxed but still immensely powerful. The difference in our positions was never more stark. He owned the view. I was just visiting the floor. "I understand that feeling," he said, and the tone of his voice shifted. It was softer, more reflective. It was the first human tone I'd heard from him, and it resonated uncomfortably close to my own guarded core. I waited, unsure how to respond to an intimacy I hadn't earned, and certainly didn't expect. Was he talking about the pressure of being CEO? The constant public glare? Or was I just projecting my own solitary reality onto the man who had everything? "I often feel like I'm only ever seen as Mr. Sterling, the function, the corporate identity," he continued, the fatigue in his eyes more pronounced now. "Never Adrian. Do you ever feel like you're only Lila from marketing? The function? The dependable analyst?" The similarity of our internal experience, if what he was saying was true, was shocking. He was using my own language of invisibility and applying it to his gilded cage. This wasn't professional chit-chat. This was discomfort, the kind that came from stepping too close to the flame. "I think most people at our company see the role, not the person," I said carefully, choosing my words meticulously. "It keeps things simple." "Does it?" he challenged. He took a single step toward me, closing the physical distance just enough to make my heart accelerate again. or does it just make things lonely? I swallowed, the simple question undoing years of carefully constructed emotional defense. I felt heat rising in my neck. He was probing at a wound I didn't even know he could see, all because I brought the wrong coffee. This conversation, this unexpected depth, felt fundamentally wrong for a Tuesday afternoon in the CEO's office. I needed to leave, before he knew too much, before I felt too much. His question, or does it just make things lonely, hung between us, heavy and demanding. I didn't answer immediately. My internal monologue was shouting at me to retreat to neutral ground, to mention Elodie's call list, to excuse myself, but his vulnerability was suddenly more compelling than my sense of self-preservation. Sometimes, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I looked down at my hands, resting on Elodie's pristine desk blotter. It definitely makes things lonely, but the loneliness is predictable. That's the trade-off, isn't it? He didn't nod in agreement. He walked back to his massive desk, but instead of sitting, he leaned on the edge, closer to me than before. He looked at the vast emptiness of his office, then back at me. Predictable, he repeated, savoring the word as if tasting something bitter. I spent my entire 20s and most of my 30s building this predictability. It required 0 mistakes, 0 deviations, and absolute control. It was the only way to manage the chaos my family left behind. This was the first time I heard him refer to anything personal. The company's troubled history was public knowledge. A messy transition after his father's sudden death, the boardroom battles, the near collapse. But hearing Adrian Sterling acknowledge his own role in managing that deep, personal chaos was startling. "That sounds exhausting, Mr. Sterling," I murmured. He smiled again, that tight, brief movement. "It is. And the strange thing is, when you finally achieve the silence and the control, you look around and realize the only person you have left to share it with is the ghost of the version of yourself who desperately needed that silence." He rubbed his temples slowly, revealing a profound sense of exhaustion that no amount of success could cure. I woke up this morning and looked at my calendar. It was filled with meetings, negotiations, and strategic dinners. Not one single interaction that wasn't functional. My perception of him shattered instantly. He wasn't the invincible statue I saw in the annual reports. He was a man who felt the oppressive weight of his own creation. The asymmetry in our positions hadn't vanished, but the emotional power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. He was the CEO, but he was also the loneliest man I had ever met. "You're the only person who has been in this office today who wasn't scheduled," he continued, looking directly into my eyes. "You came because of a mistake with a cup of coffee. You're the first unpredictable thing to happen here in months." My chest felt tight. He wasn't talking about the latte anymore. He was talking about the break in the routine, the disruption that was me. The feeling of being chosen, even accidentally, even just to hear a confession of loneliness, was overwhelming. I felt my own carefully managed walls crumbling. I didn't want to fix the problem and leave anymore. I wanted to understand how someone who had everything could feel so much like me. The phone remained silent. Adrian was still leaning against the desk, and I was still in Elodie's chair. We were technically still at work, but the atmosphere had transformed into a bubble of shared, unexpected honesty. The silence that followed his confession of loneliness wasn't heavy or awkward. It was safe. It was the silence of two people recognizing a mirror image in a highly improbable setting. "I don't know what to say to that, sir," I finally whispered. He waved a hand dismissively. "You don't need to say anything. Just listen. It's been a long time since I felt comfortable saying anything remotely personal out loud." He pushed off the desk and walked over to the unused coffee station in the corner, a sleek machine that probably cost more than my annual salary. He took a heavy, white porcelain cup and started preparing his actual coffee. the double espresso he preferred. "Do you want me to bring the latte back down and reheat it?" I offered, a desperate attempt to return to the script of employee and employer. "No," he said without turning around. "If you reheat a latte, you kill the foam and burn the milk. It's useless." He carefully pressed a button, and the rhythmic grind of beans filled the air. "Besides, I asked you to stay and answer the phone. The phone hasn't rung. You're free to relax for a minute, Layla." I did relax slightly. I watched him work the espresso machine. It was a mundane act, yet deeply satisfying to witness. He seemed completely focused on the simple task of brewing coffee, his shoulders losing a little of their corporate stiffness. The scent of dark, rich coffee filled the sterile air, a sharp contrast to the cold vanilla latte still sitting untouched on the credenza. "Do you usually make it yourself?" I asked, breaking the comfortable quiet. "Only when Elodie is out. I prefer the control," he admitted, the corners of his mouth twitching upwards. "I hate asking someone else to do something simple that I can do perfectly well myself. It's a waste of their time." "And you trust yourself not to burn the milk," I added, remembering my earlier mistake. He turned, holding the tiny steaming cup. His smile this time was real, warm, and utterly disarming. "Exactly. Lila, you're observant. Very little gets past you." He took a careful sip of the bitter espresso, his eyes closing in momentary satisfaction. He looked like a man drinking water after a long run. He didn't offer me any, and I didn't expect him to. We were simply sharing this enclosed, privileged space, connected by the quiet admission that the corporate grind made both of us feel more like cogs than people. "How long have you been here, Lila?" 3 years in September, I replied. "And how often do you think about leaving?" The question was so direct, so relevant to my frequent late-night reflection sessions, that I couldn't lie. "Every few months, when the ceiling starts feeling too low." He nodded slowly. "The air is thin up here, too, just less crowded." We stood in that silence, him with his black coffee, me with my cold latte sitting uselessly between us. There were no declarations, no promises, but the sense of shared understanding, the true connection, was heavier than any spoken word. We both knew, without having to name it, that this was not a professional interaction anymore. The warmth of Adrian's smile faded, replaced by that familiar, serious expression. The moment of shared intimacy felt dangerously fragile, like a delicate piece of glass balanced on the edge of the desk. My mind immediately slammed the brakes. This was Adrian Sterling. I was Lila. There were clear professional lines drawn in the sand, lines that, if crossed, could ruin the functional, predictable life I had built. I stood up, the movement abrupt. "Mr. Sterling, it's almost 3 p.m. I should really check on my team's metrics downstairs. And if the phone hasn't rung by now, I imagine the call was rerouted." I needed to inject formality back into the situation, to rebuild the wall before it completely collapsed. The thought of losing my job over a ridiculous, accidental connection sparked a sharp, cold fear in my stomach. I couldn't afford risk. My ambition was quiet survival, not dramatic confrontation. He watched me, his expression unreadable, and I knew he understood exactly what I was doing. I was retreating. "You're running," he stated, the observation flat, not accusatory. "I'm returning to my responsibilities," I corrected, grabbing the cold mug of latte. I had to dispose of the evidence of my misstep. "Lila, look at me." I hesitated, but his voice carried that low, magnetic authority, and I found myself meeting his gaze. My heart was pounding, a physical reaction to the sheer taboo proximity of the moment. My boss, the powerful CEO, was holding me captive with nothing but his stare and a startlingly vulnerable conversation. "You're right to be careful," he said, acknowledging the hierarchy that separated us. "There are rules. We both operate within strict boundaries. That predictability you value, I enforce it. I am not ignorant of what this looks like." His admission didn't calm me. It elevated the tension. He wasn't dismissing the potential conflict. He was acknowledging it and choosing to ignore it in favor of something else. Something dangerous. "Then I respectfully suggest we end this conversation, sir," I managed, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. "It was a mistake for me to stay. I value my position here." He nodded slowly, understanding the unspoken implication. "I value my life, and this conversation is a threat to it." "I respect that," he said. He took another sip of his espresso, then placed the small cup down on his desk with a deliberate, soft clink. "But I need you to understand something, Lila. The mistake wasn't bringing the wrong coffee. The mistake was assuming I wouldn't notice the person who brought it." He didn't move toward me. He didn't break eye contact. He simply let the weight of that statement settle between us, forcing me to confront the idea that my invisibility wasn't as absolute as I thought. He wasn't just observing me in this room. He had noticed me before. And that realization made the simple act of walking out the door suddenly feel impossible. The cold ceramic of the mug was slick in my sweaty grip. His words. "The mistake was assuming I wouldn't notice the person who brought it," echoed in the vast, quiet space. It implied a history I wasn't privy to, an attention I hadn't asked for. "Mr. Sterling," I started, trying to sound logical, trying to find my footing on the treacherous ground of his office. "With respect, I'm just an employee. I work on the 10th floor. My visibility is non-existent by design." "I know where you work, Lila," he interrupted, his voice calm, cutting through my nervous protest. "I see the department metrics. I see who consistently delivers the most thorough, highest quality work without ever asking for recognition. I know the kind of mind that prefers to analyze the chaos from a safe distance, but still manages to control it perfectly." He paused, letting the scope of his observation sink in. He didn't just know my job performance, he had interpreted my personality through it. He didn't see an analyst, he saw a kindred spirit hidden in plain sight. "It's not just your work," he continued, taking a slow step forward, finally breaking the professional boundary of his desk. He stopped about 5 feet from me, close enough that I could smell the sharp, clean scent of his expensive cologne, a scent that seemed to embody both control and exhaustion. His eyes, those intense hazel eyes, bored into mine, forcing me to hold the gaze. "Last month," he began, his voice dropping lower, "there was a fire alarm drill at 6:30 p.m. I was leaving the building late. Everyone was rushing for the stairs, irritated. I saw you stop, crouch down, and spend a full minute helping an elderly courier pick up a scattered box of envelopes. You didn't ask for help. You didn't look up to see if anyone was watching. You just helped him quietly, put the envelopes back in the box, and made sure he was steady before you continued down the stairs." My breath hitched. I barely remembered that moment. It was instinct, an act of human kindness I performed without thinking. The fact that Adrian Sterling had witnessed it, had stored it, and was now reciting it back to me, was emotionally devastating. "That," he said, the words simple and powerful, hitting me in the center of my chest, "is when I realized you weren't just the name on the metric report. You were a person who still sees the quiet, necessary things others walk right past. And that is what I need." He closed the remaining distance between us, not touching me, but dominating my personal space. The air crackled with unspoken urgency. He looked down at the cold latte in my hand, then back up at my face. This was his final declarative statement, the climax that undid everything. "I don't need the perfect hot black coffee I ordered. I need the imperfect cold mistake that brought you here." My mind went blank. The world had shrunk down to the 5 feet of space between us, and the intense, unflinching sincerity in Adrian Sterling's eyes. "I need the imperfect cold mistake that brought you here." He wasn't asking me to ignore the risk. He was asking me to embrace the chaos of the unexpected. I felt a massive wave of heat wash over me, making my ears ring. This was the moment of choice, the point of no return, where I either walked away and preserved the sterile safety of my life, or I stepped forward into a complexity that terrified me. I still held the cold, useless latte mug. I tightened my grip on the handle until my knuckles were white. I didn't think anyone saw that. I finally managed, my voice thin and fragile, referencing the incident with the courier. It was the only way to acknowledge the depth of his attention without immediately addressing the impossible implications of his desire. I see a great many things no one thinks I see, he countered softly. It is part of the job, but I don't usually act on them. He lifted his hand slightly, a silent, tentative offer. This feels necessary. My fear was warring violently with a sudden, devastating sense of being truly known. For years I had perfected the art of blending in, of keeping my gentle nature protected by layers of professionalism and low expectations. And now, the most powerful man in the building had peeled back those layers with nothing but his honesty. I am terrified, Mr. Sterling, I confessed, the words raw and involuntary. I don't operate outside the lines. I don't break rules, especially not these rules. I know, he said. He didn't try to dismiss my fear. He validated it. I am asking you to step outside the lines for a moment. Just a moment, Lila. He waited. He didn't pressure me. He just held my gaze, allowing me the space to measure the terrifying weight of his request against the intoxicating promise of his complete attention. I thought about my predictable evening. Thai takeout, a book, the quiet loneliness. I thought about the emptiness in his office, the quiet chaos he carried. And I realized that the greatest risk was not trying. The greatest risk was returning to my safe, cold, predictable existence, knowing that this possibility had existed. I slowly lowered the cold mug to Elodie's desk, the ceramic, clink, sounding final and absolute. I don't know what this means, I whispered, the admission a surrender. But I don't want to deny that you saw me. It wasn't a brave acceptance. It was a fearful, trembling admission of truth. I didn't promise him anything, but I promised myself not to hide anymore. A wave of relief, soft and profound, washed over Adrian's face. It was the first time I saw him look truly unguarded. He didn't rush the moment. He simply stood there, letting my vulnerable admission settle. Good, he said, his voice low and firm. That's all I needed to hear. He walked past me, retrieved his black espresso cup, and then turned back toward the window, the city lights beginning to bloom in the late afternoon smog. I have an investor dinner tonight, he explained, his tone returning to his professional calm, yet underscored with a new intimacy. It will run late. I don't want to talk about spreadsheets or market volatility anymore, Lila. I want to talk about the things you see when everyone else is rushing past. He looked at his watch, a heavy, expensive piece of hardware. When you finish your work downstairs, meet me by the executive elevators at 7:30 p.m. I'll be finished by then. We will walk. It wasn't a date. It was an instruction wrapped in an invitation. A conversation that needed a quieter, less corporate setting. He wasn't asking me to ignore the structure of our lives, but to simply step out of the office and into the real world with him for a moment. The executive elevators, I confirmed, my voice steadier now. The fear was still present, but it was being slowly replaced by an undeniable, electrifying anticipation. Yes, and Lila? He turned fully, his expression serious. Don't worry about the cold coffee. I'll dispose of the evidence. He gave me a curt professional nod, the CEO persona momentarily reasserting itself. The transition was a silent promise of discretion. I picked up my bag and walked out of the silence of the 22nd floor, across Elodie's empty desk, and into the elevator. The descent felt infinitely faster than the ride up. Back on the 10th floor, the noise of my colleagues, the flickering of monitors, and the scent of lukewarm desk lunch felt overwhelming and strangely distant. I sat back down at my station, the chaos of my usual routine now seeming inconsequential. The spreadsheets blurred. I was no longer Lila from marketing, the invisible analyst. I was the woman who had brought the CEO cold coffee by mistake, and who was now counting the minutes until 7:30 p.m. I had accepted the unpredictable, knowing it might lead to a spectacular career-ending disaster, but feeling, for the first time in years, completely, intensely seen. The story didn't end with a solution. It ended with a beginning. The conversation wasn't over. It was just waiting for the city to quiet down. Did Adrian Sterling really just change the course of my life with 5 simple words? If you love complex, honest romances where the lines between professional and personal blur because of deep human connection, hit the like button. Tell me in the comments, would you risk your job for a chance at being truly seen? Subscribe so you don't miss the next story where simple mistakes lead to life-altering connections.